I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the Science Gateways Community Institute if you're new to our webinar series and or have not been on our mailing list before and someone let you know about this webinar. Essentially, the Science Gateways Community Institute is an NSF-funded organization that is here to facilitate the community sharing experiences, technologies, and practices with each other. And we also provide resources and services at no cost. Some of those resources are just documents and such online, but other ones are in-person resources, which I'm going to tell you about. So our first service area is called the Incubator, and this has two major functions. One is a Science Gateways boot camp that it offers twice a year. If you have a gateway, you can apply, and 2 or 3 of your team members can come and learn about sustainability and other best practices for developing and sustaining a gateway. We also have one-on-one consulting, which you can request from our website. And then the extended developer support is hands-on development support. So this is also a consulting situation, but these consultants will support you with anywhere from 3 months up to a year of programming support. And that is also available through our website. You can apply for that support. The Scientific Software Collaborative is in the process of developing and has developed part of a resource which has gateways listed online. So you can list your gateway. You can find a gateway if you'd like to find one to use for your research or to see how it works or anything like that. But also, right now we're building in a capacity to also share software components that you can promote. So that is on our website as well. And then community engagement and exchange is the area that brings you this webinar series. We also bring you a conference that we just had in this past month in October, and next year it will be September 25th to 27th in Austin, Texas. It's a terrific experience with tutorials and presentations and lots of opportunities to interact. So the Community Engagement Exchange also provides the content for our website, and if you're interested in featuring what you do on our website, we are happy to help you with a guest blog post, so feel free to volunteer for that. Finally, we have a workforce development area which provides experiences and training for students, as well as a networking organization called the Young Professionals Network. So there's more information about that on our website where you can learn about some of the initiatives that they've done, as well as some of the summer internship and educational opportunities. So with that, I'm just going to say one last word, which is because we're funded by the NSF, they like to know that we're actually having an impact. And because this webinar is free and we want to prove to them that their money that covers our time and efforts for organizing this is worthwhile, we really appreciate your feedback. It also helps us develop future programs. So at the end of this, towards the end of this, we will post the link to the feedback questionnaire, which is really short, on our chat area. We'll also have it on a final slide that we'll put up while Paul is answering questions. So please do answer that and help us learn how we can improve this to meet your needs better. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and let Paul take over and get his slides set up. And I'd like to, I'm really pleased to introduce Paul Parsons from Purdue. He is a professor, assistant professor there teaching usability, so he knows this stuff inside and out. He also teaches in our boot camp that we just mentioned that the Incubator offers. So he is available both to teach as well as to provide usability consulting support. I know that from the ratings of the boot camp, his last presentation was a big hit, so I think you should be enjoying this very well. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Paul and let him take over.
Okay, great. Thanks, Catherine. I assume people can see my screen.
Yes, we can see your screen, and Nighty will mute any background noises, just so you know.
Great. Okay. Thanks for that introduction. And thanks everyone for joining. I can see a list of a number of people here. Unfortunately, I can't see you. So I'm just imagining that everyone's really excited and attentive. I can convince myself whatever I want, but I guess more importantly, you can see my screen and my slides, and I'm happy to be here to talk to you about usability and user-centered design. I'll tell you just a little bit about myself. Catherine already mentioned a few things that are here. So I'm at Purdue. I'm an assistant professor here. I have a background in computer science and cognitive science. I specialize in human-computer interaction. In terms of the teaching work that I do, I've previously done some work teaching human-computer interaction. And usability, those types of topics to computer science students. And now I'm heavily involved in teaching and developing a brand new program at Purdue for user experience design. It's one of the first in the nation at the undergraduate level at a major research university. And so that's a really exciting program. We've got a lot of great students coming out of that. As Catherine mentioned, I'm also involved in the incubator for Science Gateways, where we do usability consulting work for your gateways. So I've got a few objectives for this session. The things that I hope that you will get out of this. So the first one is to value the importance of usability and user-centered design. The second one is to be able to identify at least some common usability problems. And these are oriented towards the web. The third one is to appreciate various strategies for identifying and fixing common problems. So the types of methods that we might usability experts might use to assess and fix problems. And then the fourth is to develop a little bit of vocabulary to be able to communicate with usability experts in an informed way, so that you have a sense of what we do and how you could talk about doing a usability assessment on your gateway, as an example. And so I'll revisit these quickly at the end, and hopefully you feel like these objectives have been met, and then my job will be done. What I'm going to do first is a really brief history about why we should care about this, where it comes from, and what we mean when we talk about user-centered design and usability. So in the past, the way that we designed software interfaces was really done in a system-centric way, as opposed to a user-centric way. And really, what ended up happening is that people had to adapt to the technology. So the focus was on developing the technology and then training people so that they could then use it appropriately. When we talked about design in that context, really the concerns were, well, what can we do? What are the capabilities? What can we build with a certain platform? How efficient is it? How can we optimize resources, and so on? Now, the point I want to make here is that even though these things are still very important, especially as any developer would know, most users don't really care so much about these things. They don't really care about resources being optimized unless they actually impact their experience with the software. Okay, so this is this system-centered sort of model. I want to give you a few seconds just to read this comic strip. Okay, so obviously this is a comic, but I think it's indicative of some real things that actually happen with software. And so the question I want to ask is, what do you think the view of the user is here? And what I want to suggest is that the view of the user here is someone who should really adapt to the system. So this is connecting back to that previous slide, where the focus is really, well, let's create something and then figure out how we get people to use it, how they adapt to it. Here's another one. So the question again, what's the view of the user here? And I'll suggest that the view of the user is that the user is just like me, and me being the developer. So thinking that the things that I'm interested in as a developer must be the things that the user is also interested in. Yeah, this is still very much under a system-centered paradigm. So the point is that if we want to actually create usable software that people find easy to use and they like to use it and they're satisfied and so on, there needs to be a shift away from this system-centered sort of paradigm to user-centered paradigm. And that's where this idea of user-centered design comes in. So the first rule of user-centered design is that you need to know your users. And there's a subcomponent to that, which is that you are not the users. You being either the developer or the designer or the project manager, whatever it may be, that you are not the user. And then there's a corollary to this, which is if you think you know your users, think again, because you probably don't. And there's all kinds of evidence to back this up. And so user-centered design is really bigger than just usability. So I want to sort of situate usability in a much broader sort of philosophy of design, which is user-centered design, which puts the user at the center of the whole design process, and has a certain sort of methodology that's followed, and certain principles that need to be adhered to, and certain ways that we evaluate whether or not things are actually working for the users. As just a quick overview of what this whole thing means when we talk about a user-centered design process, this is one simple sort of model of what that looks like. And typically what we do is we start with doing user research. And what that means is we go and try to understand our users. So we go and do research on the users. And so we might go and interview them, observe them, do focus groups with them, all kinds of methods for doing that. But what we're really trying to do is learn about the user. What do they need? How do they think? What goals do they have? What do they do in their typical sort of workflow? And so on. Then we would move to actually doing some kind of design work based on that user research, doing some prototyping. It might be really low fidelity sketching, wireframing, and so on. And then we would do some kind of actual building, so dealing with prototyping, working with developers, actually creating something, and all of these can connect back to each other. And then we do evaluation and testing. I would actually suggest that this usability testing piece that just came in at the end should actually be integrated throughout the whole diagram. I didn't create this diagram myself. And so this is just a quick way to think about what we mean when we talk about a user-centered design process. And I'm not going to focus on this whole process for this presentation. I'm mostly just focusing on this piece here, which is usability, some examples of usability, principles of usability, and how we test usability. And so what I want you to take away from all this is that usability is just one piece of the bigger thing that we call user-centered design. And that's what I'm mostly focusing on today. Okay, so when we talk about usability, most of you probably have some sense of what that means. If you use some software that's frustrating, you might say that the usability is not good here, or you use something that seems to work well and you say it has good usability. But there's more to it, more to this sort of construct of usability. And what I want to do is give you a little bit of language that you can use to think about usability and talk about it. And so I'm going to break it down into a few components. And these are pretty well established. You'll find different people talking about this differently, but these are sort of well established as the core elements of usability. So the first one is learnability, and this refers to how easy it is for a new user to learn to use your software. Second one is efficiency, and so this has to do with after someone knows how to use it, how efficient is it? How quickly can they do what they need to do? Memorability, so if someone knows how to use your software, they go away for a little while, they come back to it, how easy can they reestablish their proficiency? Errors, so how many errors do users make with the software? Are they serious or not so serious? How bad are they? And how easily can they recover from them? The last one is satisfaction. So how pleasant is it to use this software? So these are 5 sort of elements or components of usability. And we can see that anytime there are problems with any of these things, we would typically say there's a usability problem here. So this gives you a little bit of language to talk about usability. Now, when it comes to why usability might be poor, there are many reasons. I'm going to suggest just a couple here, really sort of high-level categorization of some of these problems. One might be that, well, you're doing something where you don't actually understand the users. And this might mean that you don't know what the user's needs are, you don't know what their characteristics are, what their constraints are, what their goals are, and so on. And then another sort of category of problems is that you're actually violating some established principles. And these are based on human psychology, about how people perceive information, how they think, so perceptual and cognitive principles, and how they relate to how we design interfaces and websites and so on. And so, as I mentioned, the first one might look something like you're actually solving the wrong problem. So you create a solution to a problem that's not really the problem. Some of you might have experienced this, where you try to use some software, some app, or whatever, and it turns out it doesn't really do what it's supposed to do, and it doesn't help you with whatever you're trying to do. That's one sort of broad category of where usability problems come in. I'm not going to go into detail about that one. What I'm mostly going to focus on is this second category, which is really about established principles, things that we know about how people perceive information, how they think, how they reason, how human memory and attention works, and so on. And those can be translated into very clear principles that should be followed in design. When you're designing a website, for instance, for your gateway. And we're going to go through a few examples of these in just a second. So when we talk about principles, I just quickly wrote down a few that came to mind. There are probably, there are whole books about these, but realistically, there are probably a few dozen anyway that are sort of prominent, and we're not going to cover all of them, of course. We teach multiple weeks in a class that I teach might just be on these principles. So what I'm going to do is just select 4 of them and show you some examples so that you get a sense of what I'm talking about here, and maybe appreciate how to identify them if you see them, maybe in your own gateway or somewhere else. And so these are the 4 that I'm going to go through. So the first one is called visual hierarchy. What this refers to is the way that elements, things that are on your page look and are organized. And what that actually suggests to our perceptual system is importance. And there's a strong influence on the way that your eyes are drawn to certain things on a page, and things that you see first, and your eyes prioritize over others. So I'm going to show you an example here next of a website. What I want you to do is just take in the first, say, 3 or 4 seconds that you see the page, just try to know where your eyes are drawn to, and try to think about whether this seems like it's really well organized and you know sort of what you can do on this page, or maybe if it's a bit more confusing. Here's the page. This is a real page. I just grabbed this screenshot yesterday. And so what I want to suggest is that this is an example where this principle is violated. It's not well done. And so when I look at this page, I can see the title at the top, a couple other things where my eye is kind of drawn, but otherwise it's very confusing. And I'm kind of looking all around. I don't really know what's more important than something else, what should take priority. And so this is a clear example where this principle is violated. So let's look at another one. So just do the same thing. This is an example of a pizza and pasta website. Again, a few things that suggest a type of visual hierarchy, but still nothing really prominent that sort of tells me what's the most important thing on the page that I should attend to. Now, the reason I chose this one is because this company actually redesigned their website. So this is a bit old. I think maybe this one is from 2010. And I just took a screenshot of their site yesterday, and you can see that there's an improvement when we talk about this idea of visual hierarchy. So here's the new version of the site. So immediately, I think what your eyes are drawn to are a few things. So these red sort of large oval kind of things near the top, perhaps the logo in the middle, and the order button at the bottom. And so there's something that this principle is being exploited to draw your attention to certain places on the screen. So here's another example. This is an example of a website for a JavaScript framework. This is a screenshot from the site a few years ago. And here I want to suggest that this idea of visual hierarchy, it's not really done so well here. It's not that clear where I should look and what's most important. So I just feel a little bit overwhelmed when I look at it. And what I'll show you next is an example screenshot I grabbed of the site yesterday, which looks like this. And I think that for most people, your eyes are almost immediately drawn to maybe one of a few things, but probably those green download buttons in the center. And I imagine the reason they did this is because they did some kind of studying and understood what they're we're interested in, and primarily to download the software. And so when you land on the page, immediately your eyes are drawn to those buttons first, and then other things second and third, and so on. And so that's an example of a good use of this principle. So there are a number of ways that you can actually create this kind of visual hierarchy on a page. Obviously, things like size of text, color, shape, spacing. So these are things related to typography and visual elements on the page. And so all of those can be exploited in different ways. And if you know what your users are looking for when they come to your site, you can exploit that and design it so that what the user experiences is something very intuitive, but really you're just using this principle of visual perception to do this. Okay. So next, I want to talk about what's called Gestalt perception, and this is an idea that our perceptual systems basically order our experience. So we see all these things in our visual field, but somehow we actually give some order to them. And there are a number of principles or laws that come out of this actually school of psychology. I've listed a few of them here, and I'm going to show you two examples. What I'm going to do is show a really sort of simple and abstract one, and then show an example in a website. So this idea of similarity, okay, is the first one. I'm just showing a few shapes. They're all the same color. And if you ask most people, what do you think, what elements here are similar to each other? Most people will say, well, there are two categories, circles and squares. So people create that order based on shape. Now, if I were to do this, you see that all of a sudden there's a different type of ordering going on. Your perceptual system, for most people, sees the colors as more strongly related than the shapes. So you're going to see the orange or yellow shape as one type of category of things that are related, and the blue as the other, even though they're different shapes. And so an example where this is exploited, you can probably see this all over the place. But here's a website. I just grabbed this screenshot. And there are a number of instances of similarity going on here. One of them is these code snippets that are shown in the screen. You see that even without reading them, without knowing what the content is, your perceptual system is suggesting to you that they're similar, that they somehow belong to the same category of thing. And so indeed they do when you look at them. And that's because you have, for instance, the grayish sort of background or outline that they're embedded in. You have similarity of shape, similarity of size, similarity of color, and then there are other instances of similarity even on this page. So similarity of the size of the text suggests sort of natural grouping. Similarity of the color, for instance, the links are blue, and so on. And so all of these things are going on without you noticing. Your perceptual system is just sort of naturally doing this. And so this is an example of a good use of this principle, which relates to its usability. So okay, that's similarity. The next one I want to suggest is proximity. And so here we see a number of shapes. They're all just sort of situated on the center of the page there. And if I did something like this, all of a sudden, you're naturally going to think of these as two groups. And that's just because your perceptual system is seeing that some of them are closer together than others. And even if I did this, where I make some of them a different color, you're still going to think of the two groups being the same as they were in the previous slide. So essentially what's happening is your perceptual system is overriding the similarity of the color with the proximity of the elements. And so you can see examples of this all over the place in well-designed websites. One example here, I'm just going to point out a few things on the page. This is a landing page for GitHub. There are a number of instances of proximity here, so you can see even something as simple as putting the label for the field close to it. When you look at that set of fields, it's very natural to assume that the username is related to that first text box, and then email is related to the second one, and so on. There's no confusion because of the proximity. So username is closer to that first box than, say, email and that label. And so again, naturally, your perceptual system is just suggesting to you that those are related. A couple other things. So we see the sort of cluster of things up in the top right. And so even without knowing what the content is, you're naturally going to assume that those things are related. Again, over here, sort of in the middle, that whatever that content is also related because of the proximity of those things. And of course, we also see instances of similarity on this page too. And so there are a number of these sort of perceptual principles that if we actually analyzed really good web pages, meaning, sort of usable, high usability, we would see instances of these things all over the place. So those are just two examples of those types of principles. The next thing I want to talk about is navigation. And this has to do with how people move about your site, how they move from page to page, and how they go back and forth and so on as they're completing their tasks. And there are just a few really fundamental questions that should be answerable at any point in a user's workflow when they're on their site. So the first one is, where am I? Meaning, where am I in the site? Where am I in the sort of bigger picture of the site? Where have I been? So where did I come from? Where did I start? And how did I get to where I am? And where can I go? So what can I do next? What are the options that I have here? These are three basic questions that should be answerable if the navigation of a site is good. So what I want to do is I want to show a live example here of a site that I just came across the other day. I read this story of someone complaining about the navigation on this Alfred Sung website. So I'm gonna go there. Hopefully you can follow my screen as I switch over to the browser, and just someone tell me if you can. Okay, so this is the website. Somebody mentioned that they were looking for eyeglasses and they just got so confused that they abandoned the site. So I'm going to try it out. I'm on the site. I want to find some type of glasses for myself. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to click on products. Okay. Men. Okay. Eyewear. All right. So I'm here. Now, what can I do? I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I actually don't know where to go or how to find a type of frame. I can't click on anything. I can't scroll. So if we go back to those fundamental questions about navigation, where am I? I'm not really sure. I'm somewhere sort of in the products section, but I don't really know how that fits in the bigger picture. Where have I been? Well, I don't know. I clicked on some stuff and I got here, but I'm not really sure. Nothing's telling me that. Where can I go? That's even more confusing. I'm not sure where I can go. I guess this is the only thing I can click on is this, and it brings me back to the same thing. I don't even know how to get back to the home page. Usually you click on the logo, Anyway, so I don't know. It's quite bad. It's quite confusing. Um, and so that's an example. That's a bad example. An example of those basic questions not being properly answered. Um, and so I'm gonna show you a very simple, well, two good examples. So this is the Guardian. People are probably familiar with this website. Um, I'll just go over there quickly. And I want you to focus on this little thing right here that I've highlighted. And this is a way of indicating the navigation in the page. Many of you might be familiar with it. It's called breadcrumbs. So if I go over to the Guardian here, and I can see if I click on, let's say I click on World, you notice that here it's showing me this sort of hierarchy of navigation. So I've gone from home to world. Now I'm going to click Americas. And you can see I've got a sense of where I am in the page. Okay, I've got a sense of where I've been because it's showing me here. I was at home and then world and so on. And I've got a good sense of where I can go based on the options that I have up here. So an example where those questions are being answered in a decent way, and I don't feel confused and frustrated. Yeah, I'll show you one more here. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this. This is a way to deal with really long pages that have many sections on them. And this is on Strap's website, and I think this is, I got to change the version here. So you'll see something, they call it a scroll spy. So as I scroll down this really, really long page, you've got this thing that's anchored on the side over here. And it's just showing me where I am in this huge sort of, sequence of things. I can just quickly look over. I get a good sense of where I am. It's not really telling me where I've been because it doesn't need to. I haven't actually gone to any new pages. And it's also telling me all the places that I can go, at least on this page. And so this is sort of a clever way of sort of dealing with this issue of really long sort of pages that you have to navigate through. But it's doing it in a nice way. Okay. So those are just a few principles and examples where they've been used well or haven't been used well. Now I want to talk about some methods, some ways that usability experts actually go about dealing with these things, identifying them and solving them and so on. And so similarly, there are all kinds of methods that we use. We spend multiple courses teaching these to students. I just wrote down a few that came to mind. I'm just going to highlight two here. So one is what's called usability testing. It's much more specific than the concept of usability, and heuristic evaluation. And one way to think about these is to split them into two basic types of methods. One is empirical, which simply means that we're working with users. We're actually doing testing with people, and collecting data from that. The example of that is usability testing, and the other is analytical types of methods. And so basically that means we're not working with real users. We're just analyzing a website and trying to find problems with it as an example. And one way of doing that is heuristic evaluation. And there are many, many methods that would fall under these. And this is just one way to sort of help you make sense of all of them, to categorize them this way. So when we talk about usability testing, what we generally mean is that we actually sit down with users of a site. We sit them in front of the site, and we actually have them run through some common tasks, and then we collect data about what they're doing, where they're getting confused, where things are going wrong, which principles might be getting violated, and so on. And so we would often do things like we would record the screen, we might record the audio, we might record the participants' facial expressions, and so on. There are many different ways of doing it, but the essence is that we're sitting down with users and actually observing them doing some tasks, and then trying to understand where the usability problems are from that. And often what I like to do in these kinds of presentations is actually run through a sort of informal usability test. We don't have time for that, but what I would encourage you to do if you're interested, go to YouTube and just search for rocket surgery made easy, usability demo. And you can watch an actual usability demo take place. It's pretty simple, it's pretty straightforward. I like to encourage people that anybody can do a really simple usability test. You don't have to be an expert just to do a quick one, and you can learn some very useful things from that. And just sitting down with users, having them run through some very common tasks, noting the usability problems that you see, and that's a very, very common way of identifying usability problems. So that's the gist of usability testing. This is a very famous book, by the way, Rocket Surgery Made Easy. If you're interested in usability testing, this is written for non-experts. It's a very easy, sort of light read. So I'd really suggest grabbing a copy if you're interested in that. So the second one is a heuristic evaluation, and what we generally do with these is a small group of experts will sit down with the site and go through it and try to identify problems in a very systematic way. So they're not testing with users and observing users. They're using their expertise to go through the site and identify problems. So we could take, for instance, some of the examples that I just showed previously about these principles, and just sit down, go through a site exhaustively and just note all the problems that we can find with it. Typically, the way that it looks is that we could have a set of heuristics. So these are sort of rules of thumb, principles, and we're evaluating the site based on those heuristics. And so here's an example of a worksheet that an evaluator would use. It's basically a checklist. And so you see one heuristic or principle that's noted at the top here, which is called visibility of system status. And that means that the system should always tell the user what's going on, basically. And so what you see here is a checklist. So these usability experts would sit down, they would go through the site, they would look at all these items and say, for instance, does the site do this? Does it do this? Does it do this? Yes or no? Note down any comments, and do that for each heuristic. There might be, a common number is 10 heuristics. There could be more or less. Here's another one: help users recognize, diagnose, and recover from errors. So this is going back to the error kind of part of usability. The experts would sit down, go through all of these individual questions. So for one heuristic, one principle, you might have 15 or 20 questions. And you would just go through it very systematically and make notes of whatever you're seeing in the site. And so often the outcome of this, there might be many things that would come out of it, but one very typical thing is that there's a categorization of the problems that are found. And so here you see an example where someone has found some problems related to consistency, some problems related to efficiency. They note the problem, they note the heuristic that's broken or violated. There's a recommendation for how to fix it, and there's a severity rating. So some problems might be very serious, some are just maybe a bit cosmetic and not so serious. And then here they've also noted how many evaluators found that. So here they had a team of 5 evaluators, and they note how many found the problems. And so this is, if you were to have a team of experts do a heuristic evaluation on your site, you might get some form of this kind of report back that says, here are the really critical things, these are serious, here's why they're problems, here's how you can fix them. So that's a very typical result of a heuristic evaluation. Okay, so those are two two examples of some of the most common methods. Two different types. One is doing it with users. One is not, just having the experts go through the site themselves. And what I want to do now is just quickly come back to this sort of big picture of what we mean by user-centered design, what this whole sort of process is, and how you can actually think about talking to a usability expert, user-centered design expert, getting a usability evaluation done on your gateway, for example, maybe through the incubator, for instance. And so this I hope that this slide just gives you a really high level perspective on the whole process that a user-centered design sort of team might follow. And so I just want to really break it down to the really fundamental pieces. We've got user research, so understanding people, understanding users, prototyping, so that's sort of the design work, and then evaluating, testing. So really, I want to sort of suggest that it boils down to these things. And so the types of things that we do in user research, we might go out and actually meet users, interview them, observe them, work with them, try to understand what their situation is, and collect data that way. Then we'd analyze the data somehow, and so we might have all kinds of sort of textual data that we collect. We try to categorize it. We try to understand what some of the common themes are, and employ a number of methods in this sort of step. Then we would take that data, those results, and go into the next part, which is the prototyping. And that might be anything from a simple pen and paper sketch to say this is what your site should look like, or here's how the landing page should be organized, or whatever, into a little bit more sort of polished digital version of that, and maybe with some task flow and showing how the different pages of your site should sort of be related to each other. And then we've got the evaluation piece, the third piece, and that is doing testing either with users, right, as we just talked about, so doing a very standard usability test. We employ a number of methods even within that, so we can do things like eye tracking to see where people are looking on a page, and we might get results that look something like this, so we see where people are looking, and correlate that with sort of other tests that we do, and the sort of heuristic evaluation style of just having experts work through the website. And so that's just the really high level picture of what kind of stuff usability and user-centered design experts do. It gives you a little bit of language to talk about those really three sort of fundamental components. So at this point, I just want to loop back to these objectives that I posted at the beginning, and hopefully, if I've done a decent job, you've sort of achieved these, so to speak. So hopefully you can sort of value usability and user-centered design. So why should we care? Why is it important? What can we do with this? You might be able to identify some common usability problems. You might now see a web page and say, oh, the visual hierarchy here is bad, or proximity wasn't used well here, or similarity wasn't, and so on. You can appreciate some strategies that we use for identifying these. So doing a usability test, for instance, and heuristic evaluation. And hopefully you have a bit of language now at this point to be able to actually communicate with usability experts and talk to them a bit about maybe the user research that they're doing, what kind of testing and evaluation they're doing. Are they doing an empirical kind of test with users? Are they doing a sort of analytical test where experts are just running through the site? And so hopefully you're a little bit, confident about some of that language. And if you feel like you've achieved at least a few of these objectives, then I think that's a good thing. And that's all we can do in such a short time frame. So with that, I'm gonna see if there are any questions, and thank you for your attention.
Thanks so much, Paul. Yes, there is a question that came in from Gary, and he asks, how do you handle opposing views among the user base? For example, site too complex, site not complex enough.
That's a good question. So it really depends on the situation. What we try to do is achieve some level of sort of significance in our the number of people that we're testing with, and make sure that it's not just an anomaly. First off, that maybe it's just one or two people saying it's different from everyone else. If there is a real difference there, that perhaps what's really going on is you have two groups within your user base, or maybe three or something, and they really have some fundamentally different concerns. And so what we would do is we would do the user research and sort of gather that data and make sure that that's really the case. And then there are all kinds of strategies for actually handling that. And so you might do something like have two sort of modes, two different versions of your software interface. I mean, this is just a very sort of typical example, that you have one for beginners and one for advanced users, or something like that. But there are different ways of doing that, and we would make sure that that's really going on first of all, and then come up with a solution for that. Hopefully that answers the question.
We'll wait and see if Gary says it answered the question. But if anyone else has a question, yes, he says, thanks, Paul, it does. If anyone else has questions, they're welcome to put them in chat. We have enough people on the call that it would be a little chaotic if folks unmute themselves. And while people think about that, I'll let you think, and I'm going to just put in a brief plug for the evaluation to give us your feedback, as well as next month's webinar, which is going to be about the National Data Service, which is a data sharing system that has a consortium behind it. So we'll be posting an abstract about that in the next couple of weeks. And then also, we like to let people know that we do have opportunities for students and educators, and those are on our website at that URL that you see there. So we have 5 minutes, which would give us plenty of time to answer. You're one of the first presenters who's managed to actually finish and allow us plenty of time, so thank you. But I have a question for you, for folks to think about. Like, what if they were incorporating a usability person into their process? When should they get them involved? I know you have that cycle where they should really get involved at the beginning, but like, let's say they're already somewhere partway into the process. When should they get them involved, and how much should they anticipate that it would affect their delivery schedule?
Yeah, great question. The standard answer that you probably would hear is that you should be doing testing all the time. In terms of involving, someone else, not just doing a simple usability or test yourself. There's no bad time to do it. I don't know, that might not be a satisfying answer, but I think one of the things that usability experts, or user-centered design experts, are trained in, this is what we train our students in here, is even doing things like understanding problems, doing problem framing exercises, making sure that a solution is actually geared towards the right problem, making sure that the problems that the developers think are there really are there within the user base, and that kind of work can be done even before any development work is done. And then, of course, even at the very end, right before you're about to launch a product, or even right after you've launched a product, you can bring in a usability team to do some evaluation. Of course, at that point, you can't, you're not necessarily going to make major changes. Um, so, yeah, at the risk of providing an unsatisfactory answer, I would say basically at any time. But certainly once you have something in place, even a prototype, that's definitely a very suitable time to bring in a team to do that kind of comprehensive evaluation.
Great, thanks. While you're talking, another question came in from NWHC, whoever that is, asking if there is a cultural factor in user experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm not sure quite what the question is, but that's something that's very important to consider. So if you're dealing with users that cut across different sort of cultural barriers, you have to really make sure that you understand what those are, because there's a risk of designing something that you think is just common sense, or you think is something that everyone agrees to, but really it's a cultural convention. And there are all kinds of examples of this out there that you can find. And so yeah, I don't know exactly what the question is, but absolutely it's very important, and it has a significant influence on the perceived usability of any product.
Thanks. I think there haven't been any other questions coming through. We did get, hang on, here we go. One just popped up. Donnie says, literature on specifically how to approach a situation of limited staffing or budget. For example, someone who feels responsible for all of user research, design, prototyping, and evaluation with limited power to delegate to team members.
So he's asking for literature. That's a good question. So I don't know.
And incidentally, if you're stumped, you could think about it. We can post it on our website with the video and stuff too. But yeah, just thought I mentioned that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's hard to say without knowing some specifics. That book that I mentioned, which I actually have a copy of it here. I don't know if you guys can still see me, but this is that book that I mentioned. It's really focused on usability rather than the much broader sort of user-centered design sort of philosophy and process. But this one is really written for, this is Rocket Surgery Made Easy. It's really written for, I think, this kind of use case that Donnie is mentioning, which is that someone's not a usability expert. That's not maybe their main job role. They might be on a team that either doesn't value this kind of work, or doesn't have the resources for it, or whatever. And so this is basically it's a simple do-it-yourself guide, how to do usability testing really cheaply, easily, quickly. So that's one resource that I know of, which is really specifically geared to usability. I think that's all that's on the top of my head. I can maybe do some more searching, or if Donnie wants to reach out to me directly, I'd be happy to talk more.
Okay, thank you. And someone reminded me that we should remind those who might have joined after we talked about what SGCI offers, that Paul is available through the Science Gateways Community Institute as a consultant on usability, along with students interns who can help do some of that work for you. So it is the top of the hour, so I'm going to say that if folks want to get off the call, you're welcome to. There was a final question that came in, which is from Theron. I can't read my screen very well, but how would you approach the community of users to request feedback or testing new features?
Very good question. So it depends on who's from whose perspective you're looking. We do projects with companies where our students are doing usability work on the company's website, for instance, and from our perspective, we ask the company to contact their user base and sort of provide those users to us if they want us to do that testing. From the company perspective, I know I've been involved in a few discussions with some people in that role. There's obviously concerns about who can you contact and how do you not impose on them and so on. And I think companies sort of deal with those things differently. I don't know if there's any universal answer. Oftentimes, and I know that this is one major tech company that everyone's familiar with that we've been working with recently. I know they have a subset of users that they reach out to, which are sort of their I don't know what you call them. They're long-time sort of loyal users, that they have some personal connection with. They feel comfortable reaching out to them and saying, "Look, I know you've been using our software for a long time. We've got this team that's trying to make it better, and really it's about you trying to make it better for you guys, for the users. Are you willing to be involved in some testing and sharing your experience and so on, that kind of thing?" And we've had pretty good success doing it that way. So I don't know if that's quite what the question was, but that's been my experience in terms of actually working with companies who are dealing with real software, real users, and so on.
Thanks for that answer. I'll just throw in there. I'll add in that I'm aware that some organizations or projects, such as particularly gateways, because they often have either a developer or user list, they'll reach out through that and look for volunteers that way. So I think there, for example, the Jupyter Notebooks, has this huge community, and they have a Twitter feed and all that. And if there is a way that you can communicate with your audience, that's a very good way to do that.
Oh, can I add one quick thing?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Always, if you provide some incentive, you always get much better response rates. So, obviously, people don't always have money or a significant amount of money to provide. But one thing that we do to attract people is to say, you'll have a 10% chance of getting a $50 Amazon gift card or something. So, if you have $50 in a budget to throw towards a gift card, people will take those chances because they think, oh, it's not bad, I might get a gift card. So that's just a very pragmatic way, to incentivize people. And you don't have to say you're going to give every person money. You're going to just have a set budget of whatever and enter people into a draw. That always works pretty well.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for that extra tip. So with that, I think we're going to wrap up and say thank you to Paul for giving us a terrific presentation and some useful answers. And thank you to our audience for asking good questions and being so engaged. We have a lot of thank yous popping up on the chat list. I know you can probably see that now, Paul, since you're not sharing your screen. So thank you all, and we will post this video on our website, and it'll be announced also through our newsletter, and I'll make sure that we list that book that Paul mentioned, as well as other resources that might be relevant to point you towards. So you can share this with your friends too. So thanks again, everyone, and we'll call it a day.
Thanks, everyone.